Seems like everyone's in a hurry these days. At Popeyes, we make our chicken on grandma time. You think grandma rushes good cooking? You've got a second thing coming, and it's a made-with-love chicken sandwich. We marinate our chicken for 12 hours, hand batter and bread it, and serve it up as a slice of heaven sandwich. Because we were raised to believe that if you're gonna make something, make it right, and then put a pickle on it. We don't make sense, we make chicken.
Love that chicken from Popeyes.
Game over, man. Game over.
You're gonna need a bigger potion. So simple.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the InSession Film Podcast.
Welcome to this podcast review for May 27th, 2023. I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Jay Ledbetter.
Thanks for joining us, everybody. Jay, you a gardener at all? Do any gardening?
Look, some people say I got a bit of a green thumb. Other people, like Paul Schrader, say I got a little bit of a green middle finger.
Okay.
I'm a veteran out there in the old soil.
You're a veteran in the old soil. I, on the other hand, am not. I'm far from a master gardener.
Oh, I hate yard work. The worst.
I know, it's the worst. But I am excited to talk about Master Gardener because it features some gardening skills,
Sure
among
does.
many other things, because it's Paul Schrader.
That's all it is. It's basically a documentary about flowers.
Yeah, last night we talked about the documentary How to Blow Up a Pipeline. Now, the documentary about gardening.
Exactly.
So, lots of great documentaries out right now. All joking aside, I am excited to talk about Paul Schrader's latest. He's a filmmaker that is always fascinating, for better or worse. And his last few films, how are we dubbing this trilogy, Jay? Is there a general consensus?
Yeah, they call it the Man in a Room trilogy.
Man in a Room trilogy. All right.
Some dudes writing in their journals.
Some dudes writing in their journals. And spoiler alert, that happens in Master Gardener as well. This film is, of course, written and directed by Paul Schrader. It stars Joel Edgerton, Sigourney Weaver, Quintessa Swindell, among others that come and go throughout the film. Let's just go ahead and jump right into this, Jay, because there is so much to talk about with it. As,
if you say so.
It is Schrader after all, so I'll toss it to you first. What did you think about Master Gardener?
Yeah, as you mentioned right up top, JD, this is the conclusion of Paul Schrader's Man in a Room trilogy. Just a lot of bros writing in their journals about looking for forgiveness for themselves, humanity at large, or both, and probably mostly both. And this trilogy has been a thorny one. It has been dark. And in my opinion, it's been incredibly effective. And Master Gardener is, I would say, the thorniest and the darkest movie of that trilogy. And I like it a whole heck of a lot. It speaks more to my love of Schrader and of this trilogy than it does to this film's quality. I will say it is my least favorite of the three. But when you consider that The Card Counter was in my top 10, First Reformed is my second favorite movie of the 2010s. It's got a high bar to get over. And it is my least favorite of the three, and it also might just be my favorite film of 2023 so far. I really, really like this movie, and its competition is John Wick 4, so a banner year for stoic men with violent past, prone to violence. So,
Sure.
But it's really interesting when you look at this phase of Schrader's career, because he is basically as famous for his Facebook posting as he is for his movie directing in 2023. And Master Gardener is a very online movie with a pretty deep understanding of the rise and perpetuation of white supremacy groups online in recent years, especially. And the film it really tests the limits of empathy on film, because when you see these flashbacks that are revealed in the past of our main character, Narvel Roth, and then you have to consider that this is the person that we are, he's going to be holding our hand through this story. And when he is introduced, he is this, I don't know if charming is the right word, but there is something kind of, he seems like a stand-up guy at first. You want to root for him, and he seems to be really committed to his craft. And there's something very admirable about that. And forgiveness of the sins of our past is really the main through line of the film. As we do see more and more revelations come to light regarding Narvel's past. But the film pretty early on pivots to this story of mentorship, with Narvel tasked with teaching a young black girl how to tend to a garden. And from there, Narvel is forced to confront his past while still trying to hide it from the people he works for, or works with and for, I guess, and cares about. There is an easy argument to be made, I think, that this is Joel Edgerton's best performance. Sure. Not that I'm fully ready to go there yet, but his exterior calm that is so clearly at odds with his interior turmoil is really something to behold. One of the best performances of the year so far, for sure. And without his sturdy core at the center of this movie, this really challenging material could have just completely crumbled. It really requires an actor giving a performance that we can get behind. There is this element of cheering for him to overcome everything that he has gone through, while also still remembering that, this stain of his past can never be removed, in the case of this movie, literally and figuratively. But what I love most about this film, and I'm interested to hear if you even agree with this, but I love how tonally distinct this is from Schrader's previous two films. I'm going to use a term that I try to avoid like the plague and is very overused, but there is something a little Lynchian about Master Gardener to me.
Okay.
And from the synthy score from Devonte Hines, who hasn't really done a score that I've liked all that much so far, so it was great to see him kind of come to the fore in this movie. But the film also has this really flowery, formal dialogue that really brought me back to some of Twin Peaks, for example, where it does have a little bit of this soap opera-y aesthetic to it. Just a little bit. There's a dreamlike quality to the film, and it always kept me on my toes, and in the end, surprised me with its tenderness. Paul Schrader might be the most cynical writer-director of all time, and for him to end his film the way that he ends it here is pretty remarkable. And there are going to be some people who see this and want to throw their popcorn at the screen when they see the final shot.
Oh, yeah.
They will be very pissed off.
For sure.
But I found it has a provocative sweetness that I found pretty inspiring. Very good movie. Liked it a lot.
Yeah, so this film will likely be the one that I'm most against the grain on this year, because it hasn't garnered a ton of great praise, but I'm with you. I kind of loved this film. In fact, it may just be my favorite film of the year so far as well. But I certainly understand the pushback it's received. It's by far the most provocative of Schrader's Men in a Room trilogy. However, and you were just talking about this, there's a fascinating irony to that, because tonally, this film is the most tender and hopeful of the three. First Reformed is really great, one of my favorite films of its year, but it's pretty cynical and doleful. The Card Counter, I'm not quite as high on. I find that film pretty messy and uneven, but its cynicism and trauma is balanced by its reaching for hope, Whereas with Master Gardener, while there are dark components hovering over it, Schrader's tender sensibilities give the film an evocative quality that's weirdly warm and poignant. And man, do I love that irony. It's not only a compelling tonal evolution from First Reformed to Master Gardener, but because it's Paul Schrader, we're always waiting for that shoe to drop. So dramatically speaking, there's a lingering tension that he takes advantage of to subvert our expectations, especially given Narwhal's past and what we find out about him. As you're talking about, there's reason to believe that he'd be the most violent and volatile of the three leads in these films. But no, instead, he becomes the most compassionate, the most loving, and the most self-aware, which for thematic reasons, I think is very intentional. And I certainly want to get into that as this conversation goes. But as much as I loved First Reform, and on the whole, that's still the best film of the three, Master Gardener might be my favorite of them thematically, though. I love what this film is doing in that regard. And you're right, Joel Edgerton is a key reason as to why this film works, because we do need to, if empathize is the wrong word, we at least need to understand the trajectory of his path and why he chooses what he does in this film. And I think he's excellent. He's really great. It's a reserved, it's often a quiet performance, but really, really fantastic. With Tessa Swindle is also really great here. This is easily my number 2 of the 3. And honestly, and we'll get into this as we go here, I think this is an incredible, incredible companion piece to First Reformed. Despite on the surface seeming like it's quite distinctive, but I actually think the two have a lot in common and will work as a great 1-2 punch when it's all said and done.
I was kind of thinking about the through line of the trilogy because there are those superficial similarities, men in their journals and these men looking for forgiveness and confronting their pasts and futures. And I was thinking about, okay, so what is driving the characters in each of those 3 films? In First Reformed, Reverend Toller is propelled by a quest for peace and is guided by this omniscient presence that he perceives to be true. Mm-hmm. In The Card Counter, can't remember his name, I'm going to call him The Card Counter. The Card Counter is
Let's
driven,
call him Oscar.
His violent past is driven by actual people that he has to take orders from, acts of violence that he is compelled to do because it is his job.
Yeah.
And in this film, Narwhal is driven not by anyone telling him to do anything, but this innate hatred that he feels for other people that compels him to a past of violence anyway. And so just right there off the bat, far and away the least sympathetic character on the surface of all 3 of these.
Yes.
So for Schrader to say, I am going to take the least sympathetic character and make the most tender story of the trilogy.
Yeah.
Is a crazy thing. And that really does feel kind of like the genesis of this movie to me. He is trying, it is at once the most provocative of the films, but then he's provoking you even more by saying, but
yes,
I want you to feel for this person and see their humanity, which is, it's an awesome way to approach the story. I don't know if Paul Schrader ever makes another movie. We'll see. I hope he does, but if this is the last one, it feels like a great kind of encapsulation of his career. And really, I've listened to some interviews with him on this kind of press cycle for this film. And his one quote that I've heard him say multiple times in these interviews is, I used to say, I never want to leave Earth before I say F you. And now my theory is I don't want to leave this earth until I can say I love you. And that,
Yeah.
if that doesn't kind of encapsulate what this movie is about and what it represents, then I don't know what does.
I agree. And it's a big reason why I loved it, because thematically, as I noted, I think this is an incredible companion piece to First Reformed. It's, of course, not as direct, but the film is chock full of religious undertones and symbolism. The most obvious being the narration around seeds and how they're reaped, a big motif in Christian text. But it's how Schrader accompanies that dialogue with visuals and with character that I find so mesmerizing here, because at the heart of this film, Schrader is posing some incredibly provocative questions around forgiveness, yes, but also rebirth. Is there a line where forgiveness is no longer achievable? Is it possible for people to change? Is hope attainable for those whose identities have been sown with hatred for much of their lives? These are all questions that, from a fundamental Christian perspective, is easy to answer. The ethos in the biblical faith is that forgiveness is available for everybody. But what does that look like in reality? Schrader not only wants to consider that here, but he wants to push boundaries. He wants to test every ounce of that Christian ethos. And what's the best way to do that? By giving Narvel the one identifier that's not only associated with hatred, but it's the one that most people do not find forgivable. When you see his tattoos, when we learn about his past, we immediately judge him. And we should. Don't get me wrong. His past life in many ways is unforgivable. But what if people can truly change? What if we're not always defined by our past choices? I absolutely love how Schrader explores that here. And I get why many may not respond to that idea, especially given that final shot that you were talking about. But there's a genuine warmth to this movie that should not be here given the complexities of this film and how racism is woven into it. But it's weirdly tender and hopeful of the three in this trilogy. And I just love that dichotomy that Narvel is, he has the one thing, the one identifier that we perceive justifiably as that's where we draw the line.
Yeah.
But is forgiveness still possible for those people?
Yeah.
That's what Schrader wants to pose here.
And I do wonder, because again, very online guy, is this his commentary on cancel culture a little bit? I think it's way more, philosophically interesting than that. But I wonder if that was sort of maybe a tinge of the drive that
I found it more spiritual than that.
Oh, I
especially
do too.
Given the symbolism of this film.
His Facebook presence is just so funny to me. But
it is.
It is clearly more than a cancel culture movie. This is a movie about the canceling of the soul. James.
Yeah, exactly. That's really what it is, right?
Yeah, and it is. It's interesting that he doesn't make Narvel totally squeaky clean still, which I think would be the easy path to take. He's still kind of working with corrupt cops and is not afraid to rough somebody up if he needs to. Mm-hmm. But he's trying to do it for good.
Yeah, his intentions are pure.
Yes, but he still also kind of has this innate thing within him where, how do I solve problems with violence? It's kind of all I know. It's all I have known. And whether that violence is directed at for hateful reasons or for some sense of justice that he now appears to have is up for debate. And then where do you draw that line, which is very fine. And then he also, at one point in the film, when he is trying to threaten a drug dealer who is taking advantage of the young woman that he is mentoring, he uses, racial slurs as a tool. And immediately your first question is this just an excuse for him to be able to go back into that mode? Is that something that can be entirely stripped away from his personality, from who he is?
Yeah.
And that's again another very provocative and challenging question, especially given where this film ends up. I watched Blue Collar last night, Paul Schrader's the first film that he directed, and I thought it was fantastic. And I was just thinking about, in that film, the very first scene and the very last scene, if you just put them side by side, your question would be like, how the hell did we get from there to here? That is
Sure.
I mean, that is crazy.
Yeah.
And I think this film, not necessarily the first scene, because it kind of reveals his dark past over time, but if you take one of the early flashback sequences and then you take the final shot of the film,
I mean, even that moment where we first see his tattoos.
Right. Yeah. Sure. And how the hell did we get here? And that's something really powerful that a writer and director can do. And Schrader, I think, has become over time, a better visual filmmaker, storyteller than he was even at the beginning. When Blue Collar, he definitely consulted Marty a little bit. He was like, let me, show me some of your tricks.
Yeah.
But now I would say he fully has a grasp on his style. And this is, what people call late style, which a lot of the time is perceived as directors being less inclined to really give their film some visual panache. And you do see in this film, like, the camera mostly still. I mean, First Reformed famously is just like, I am putting the camera here. It is going to stay here. And we are going to have the entire scene play out from this angle. And I think that is incredibly effective and evocative in that movie. You get a little more camera movement in this one. And just like in First Reformed, you also have I mentioned that the whole film kind of feels surreal. There is a scene in this film that fully takes you out of the world and takes the surrealism to like a literal level, much like the magical mystery tour sequence in First Reformed. It is this one moment where these characters feel some sense of relief and feel as though they can escape this shell that they feel trapped in, this world that they feel pressing down on them. Yeah. And it's visually compelling and it looks great. And there's some, it's kind of funny in this one. It's played a little bit for laughs because it is pretty goofy. It is much goofier than the Magical Mystery Tour in First Reform, but it is certainly memorable.
It is memorable, and another reason why I think this is a great companion piece to First Reformed, although tonally, of course, as you're talking about, and as we've mentioned a couple of times, that magical realism in this film has a much different bite to it. There is more of a tenderness to it, where in First Reformed, it's, I don't know if cynical is the right word, but there's certainly a bleakness to it. And it's interesting what you're talking about there with Narvel, and again, this provocative irony at play in this film, because when we see him in his present state, obviously the flashback scenes depict a very different person, but in his current state, is there anything about him that would suggest he's untrustworthy or that he's someone full of hatred? I love that
about
that
he wears long sleeves in the summer.
Maybe that's it, but I love how the film treats him and Edgerton's performance and all of that. I think he does a phenomenal job of tapping into Narvel's redeeming sensibilities. All he does throughout this film is look out for Maya and genuinely care for her. It's one thing to give Narvel that one identifier and then pose questions about forgiveness, but then Schrader does the Schrader thing where he takes it a step further, and how Maya is exactly the type of person that Narvel would hate in his past life. Her blackness is a key component to this film in terms of the broader racism injected into the story, and we can certainly talk about that. But it gives those aforementioned questions all the more heft and complexity, and I love how Schrader goes about examining that here. There's a moment where Narvel, I believe this is in one of his journal entries, he again, is invoking that biblical text of seeds and reaping what you sow. And he says something to the effect of, I'm paraphrasing here, but something to the effect of, seeds of love are grown like seeds of hate. When you mold and you foster hatred, when it's taught to you, and this is something he's talking about regarding his past, he grew up with those seeds of hate planted in him from the beginning. And that's what he sprouted into. But now he is trying to, remove that hatred, and he's trying to grow these seeds of love. And in the present time, if we never saw his tattoos, if we never saw the flashbacks, I don't think we would ever question his genuine care for those around him or the garden. Like, I think that's what's interesting about him being a gardener here. Like, he has a passion for it. He does his job very well. We would never question the credence of him being a master gardener. And I think that carries over to how he treats, the people on his team, and especially Maya. Really, the only character that he pushes back against here is the Sigourney Weaver character, for very specific reasons that we can certainly get into. But it's interesting because earlier you were talking about how there are at times some violent tendencies that come out in Narvel, and that is absolutely true. But I think what's interesting about those violent tendencies is that, yes, part of it is instinctual of what he grew up as, regarding that hatred, but he is channeling that with these intentions, and he is fighting back against his past life. So when those violent tendencies come up, it is him fighting for Maya. It is him fighting against the ethos of who he used to be. Like what we see there in that house at the end of the film, for example, like that is an outburst of violence that comes at the hands of his home being terrorized with symbols that he now regrets on a deeply spiritual level. And so the violent tendencies come out as fighting against that. He's fighting for Maya. He's fighting against, what he used to be. Even his tattoos become a part of that as well, where Maya wants him to think about whether he should even have those tattoos or not. And so constantly throughout the film, I do love how he is this genuine guy that we wouldn't question otherwise. But when we do learn about his past, it pushes us to the brink as to, again, should these people be redeemed? Are they capable of it? And then to see how that is melded with this character that, in his past life, not only would he hate this person, he likely would kill this person. And she is bringing out that hope and that warmth in him all the more than what was already there. And thematically, I just find that just stunning in this film.
Yeah, 100%. And that moment at the end in the house where he does have this violent outburst, Narvel's maybe his greatest victory, if you want to call it his hero moment, is not murdering those two people.
Yeah, absolutely. He's not the same person anymore.
Right. And, you talk about the tattoos. It seems clear to me that he keeps them kind of as a way of punishing himself, which punishing yourself is maybe the most consistent through line of this
and all three of them
trilogy. Where it's just I can't forget how screwed up I am and how screwed up the world is. And there's a big difference in how like Reverend Toller does it and how Narvel does it in this film. And also they're motivated by very different things. It's kind of like it's a crisis of faith versus a crisis of past. Or a crisis of the soul or whatever it may be.
And to speak to that real fast, because I did write a line of dialogue here. This is early on in the film, but it tethers to what you're saying there. Because one of the first times we see him writing in his journal, he said, again, he's talking about seeds, invoking that that text, and he says, given the right conditions, seeds can last indefinitely. And of course, speaking to his past. And then the next thing he says is, I wear mine on my skin. And so it's not as direct. He doesn't say, I am doing this as a punishment, but that line is very much alluding to exactly what you're saying there, that these seeds can last indefinitely. I have to bear the weight of this, and the only way for me to stay within this, this realm of where I am at now is to keep this as a reminder that I'm not that person anymore.
Mm-hmm. And let's go to parent corner. We got the two dads of InSession Film on here. You brought up this idea of, establishing a person's personality when they're a child, and really what you're taught as a kid is sort of how you end up as an adult, more or less, in the same way that I root for the Atlanta Braves because that's who my dad rooted for and who my household grew up for. I also could have been raised a neo-Nazi. Because that's the ideology that my parents kind of put into our household, if that had happened. And then at that point, there has to be a level of understanding and desire to promote change in that person and not just completely turn them away. And that's a really, really hard thing to do, because there is probably nothing more immoral or nothing that will inspire disdain quite like white supremacy in 2023.
For sure.
And have you seen, there's a Louis Theroux documentary. I think it's called Louis and the Nazis.
I have not seen that, no.
It is Louis Theroux kind of just hanging out with neo-Nazis. And I love Louis Theroux. I think he's a brilliant documentarian. And there is this family where they listen to neo-Nazi thrash metal, and they draw swastikas with chalk, and they just promote hate at every single turn. And these kids who don't really know what they're saying, and they're homeschooled too, so they're not exposed to anything else. And it's like, what are they supposed to do? They're basically being manufactured to be a neo-Nazi.
For sure. Yeah.
And that's a hard thing to, because it's so much easier to just say these are hateful, bigoted people. But then you have to just look back and figure out, how did we get here and how can we get away from that? And that's what Paul Schrader is asking with this film.
Yeah, I agree. To me, that is why I love that he's pushing the boundaries here. And I do understand that it will make people uncomfortable. It is challenging because as you noted, we mentioned this earlier, those identifiers within Narvel are one of the few things that most people would consider to be unforgivable. But we do hear him talk about, again, those seeds, how he was raised to hate these people. And anyone with kids will tell you that all that stuff is learned. I live in South Florida, where it's pretty diverse here, obviously. And so Sam's school is very diverse. And, I've seen him interact with people of all, name the range, everyone on the spectrum, I've seen him play with, and there's nothing inherently about children that make them think, oh, this person is different than me. They might be able to see it, but that's all that they recognize. And when you're brought up in a house full of love and acceptance, they won't be able to recognize that hatred. And to your point, I haven't seen that documentary, but it's certainly understandable that those kids wouldn't know anything else, because all that stuff is taught 100%. It's taught. And when that's all growing up, and then you start to see the world in a new way as you grow older and perhaps maybe start to mature a little bit, like, how do you break through those barriers? And again, like, I don't think necessarily that Paul Schrader is offering any sort of answers to that, but he is certainly posing the questions of, people that are on those fringes, is there still hope for them? And I think he is at least wanting to argue that the answer to that could be yes. And of course, he goes about it in a very Paul Schrader, where he makes that as challenging as possible. But I do love that he's willing to go there, because there are conversations that probably should be had around those questions, as challenging as it is. And it's certainly a case by case basis. I'm sure there's a lot of Nazis and neo-Nazis out there that, you know, the answer to that is an easy no, you know, but there are others like Narvel who want to change. And again, I think what's so great about Edgerton's performance and the tenderness he brings to it, how he treats Maya throughout this film, you know, everything about him is genuine. Like
from the jump.
There's
never a moment where he wavers with his
not at all.
Her.
And again, like to my opening
he
thought,
actually acts violently because of her, towards other people because of her. She still kind of brings the worst out in him, but it's only because he has this innate love for her.
Yeah. And I don't know if you felt the same, but because it's Paul Schrader, I think he takes advantage of that dramatically. Like, I was waiting for the shoe to drop. Like, okay, like he's this genuine guy. Like, what are things going to get challenging? And it never really does. Like, a lot of the drama simply comes from Maya finding out what his past was, and then having to wrestle with that, as anyone would in that situation, especially given who she is. You know, her outburst there in the cafeteria, wholly understandable.
Yeah.
You know, like everyone would have that kind of reaction there. You know, and then that's what's interesting about the hotel moment, right? Where she does confront that, she wrestles with it, and then comes to realize that despite his past, like everything I've seen about him now is not who that is. Right. And the way Schrader shoots that scene in the hotel, it's I don't know, like it's evocative, it's done with poetry, and then it transitions to that magical realism you were talking about that I think is really great. I just love the way Schrader handles that tonally, and also from a technical perspective. I think it's really great.
And how she comes to find out about his past, how she sees those tattoos, I think is a really interesting thing to contemplate, especially when you juxtapose it with a scene previous in the film with Sigourney Weaver, who again we haven't really talked about.
We should probably mention.
But Maya finds out about the tattoos because Narvel essentially dares her to see him.
Yeah, he openly invites.
He takes his shirt off to write in his journal, and at first he hesitates, and he's been hesitating to take his shirt off the entire film for obvious reasons. But it might be another form of punishment that he wants to inflict on himself. Is it that, or is it that he cares for Maya so deeply that he feels like it's time for her to know the truth? Because as long as she doesn't know that, there will be this wall between them.
Yeah.
And maybe it's probably a little bit of both. But then when you juxtapose that to the scene previously in the film where Norma asks Narvel to go to bed with him, and he takes off his shirt because she already knows about it, and there's this look of like arousal in her eyes when she sees them. I don't know if that's because she knows that she has this power over him because nobody else knows about this, or if there is some sort of underlying bigotry that she kind of gets off on this or what the deal is. But
she does
those two
ask
scenes
him
next to each other are really fascinating.
I agree. There is an interesting element there because yes, she wants him to take off his shirt, and she is certainly examining those tattoos on him and trying to again wrestle with who he knows, who she knows him to be, and then also just seeing these absolutely disgusting tattoos on him. And then she does pose a theory to him about those tattoos, which I guess I don't know if I want to say for spoiler reasons, but she certainly brings up the idea of him disregarding those tattoos. So it's not as if she is accepting of them, like she still wants them to be gone, but she definitely gets to a point where she realizes that they don't define him. They're on his body, but what makes up Norval now is not his past, and it's certainly not those tattoos. And so yeah, I do like kind of the almost titillating nature of that scene, I guess. It is shot really well. I do love the visual nature of it, and the performative nature of it. I think is really great. Should we talk about Sigourney Weaver as Normal?
Let's do it. Of course, we last saw her playing a teenage alien in Avatar: Water.
No longer a teenager on Pandora, but instead a racist plantation owner.
Yeah, and she's kind of playing an archetypal character. In some movies like this, you do have this female figurehead with this big brash personality, stone-faced, and she really gets to kind of chew some scenes up in this movie, and I think she does it very, very well. She drinks tea like nobody else in this movie. I mean, anytime she busts out a teacup, you're in for something special. But
yeah,
I mean, really, I think her character is not the most interesting in the film. I don't think, not by a long shot. She is just kind of there to function as an obstacle, kind of something that prevents him from realizing his great potential, his full potential, but also the thing that propels Maya towards him, that also allows him to realize his full potential. So it's kind of this balancing act of what she represents to Narvel particularly. But I think Sigourney is really, really good and really elevates what's on the page, because that character is, in my opinion, not super interesting.
I agree. It is very trite in many respects, but I do think it is necessary here given everything we've talked about with Narvel, and she is emblematic of a racism that's been around since the inception of the United States.
She's like the polite racist.
Well, and exactly,
the classy.
Exactly, and you juxtapose that to, let's say, the style of racism of Nazis, and it's very different. Yeah, she, has this kind of high society politeness to her, but her racism is, it comes through. If we want to certainly bring back the seeds analogy, these are seeds that, that go back to the 1700s, right? Especially in the southern United States.
Socially acceptable racism. That's kind of what she is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Horrible thing to even contemplate, but it's true.
That's what she is. But she doesn't wear it like Narvel does. She has no tattoos. It's not loud and abrasive. It's there. It comes through in her not wanting to meet Maya, even though they are technically family, right? Because Maya is the daughter of Norma's sister, I believe. Is that right? I'm trying to remember. Either way,
she's
they're
her
family. Grandniece. Yeah, that's what it is. So they are family. Maya comes to work there in the garden, but she's there for like a month before Norma decides to visit. And the only reason she even does that is because Narvel's like, you should probably go see her and say hi and have a conversation. And then throughout the conversation, when they first do meet, she's very patronizing, condescending toward her. But again, still maintaining that high societal politeness, like never wavering on that.
Bless your heart.
Yeah, exactly. It's certainly that kind of racism. And then, it gets a little bit more brazen later on in the film. You think about that scene of where, she gets her the yellow dress and they have dinner, and then she wants to confront her like lifestyle. She asks her like, oh, have you been on the internet? Like she asks her like this really obtuse question that sends Maya into a little bit of emotional volatility, so at times it's a little bit loud, but mostly she represents a very different style of hatred than Narvel, and a hatred that still lingers, that still exists, where, again, I think is important because even though what we learn about Narvel in his past, that no longer exists. And the way he confronts Norma about it, I do think is important here.
Yeah, absolutely. And so regarding the journal scenes themselves, and I mentioned kind of the Lynchian, very flowery, formal dialogue. I think those are, they're more on the nose than
more
the
obvious
other journal entries, in my opinion. And I would say that is a weakness. I don't know if you agree with that or not.
I mean, I don't know if it's a weakness.
And there's actually not that many of them in this one.
No,
not a ton.
There's not as much. I will admit they're certainly much more transparent. But what I do like about them, aside from, the obvious ties to gardening, but I see it less that and more so, again, it's invoking faith. It's invoking, these spiritual undertones, this ideology that exists in the biblical text that certainly speaks to that dichotomy of love and hate and how seeds are reaped. And yes, there's an obviousness to them that maybe renders them lesser than the narration or the journal entries we get in the previous two movies. But I do like how it invokes that religiosity as it relates to the larger questions that Schrader is posing here. So I on the whole, because of the thematic ties, I still like them, even if the dialogue is, I don't know, a little uneven, I guess. Sure.
It is kind of funny how you look at his background and the fact that he's a gardener, and then the way he speaks is very interesting. And that is kind of where that surrealism comes into play, because it does feel a little otherworldly to a certain extent. But no, it's a really, really good film, and it's fascinating. It's always great when you get to talking about a movie the way that we do, and all of a sudden you're peeling back layers that you might not have seen the first time, which is definitely what I'm doing here. And it is, you know what, I'm going to say it right now. It's number one. I like this more than John Wick 4. All right. This is my number one. A lot to talk about here. I don't expect it to stay there, but at the moment, number one of the year.
Yeah. See, and that's interesting because obviously there's a lot to see yet. I think there's a world where come next January, this is in my top 10 of the year. I think I love it top that much. 10. Yeah.
Bottom half of the 10.
I like that 6 through 10 range.
I'm trying to think. If hypothetically, if it came out last year, would it have been in my 10? I don't think it would have. I
don't know if it would have either. And obviously we have a long ways to go yet until we get to that point for this year. But I think there's a world where that's possible. I mean, I love the lengths this film is willing to go to in terms, like, to me, obviously all three of these films deal with faith and forgiveness in some sort of way, but I will die on the hill that the way Schrader treats it here is very different than the previous two. I don't think it's redundant at all. And
I don't either, but it's really fun to talk about in the context of the trilogy and how his different approaches with each movie.
There's certainly been an evolution to it. But I do love how this almost juxtaposes First Reform. It very much does tonally, but I also think it's a complementary piece to the questions that First Reformed is getting to. And this takes it to the other end of that extreme in terms of how we feel about forgiveness and where does one lie in it all?
I'm thinking about kind of the mirroring of First Reformed in this film, and First Reformed is very much about, do I want to bring a child into a world that I think is corrupt and doomed? And this is a film about a child who was brought into an environment that was corrupt and doomed.
Yeah.
And very different. They're talking about it from an environmental perspective in First Reform, but certainly there are parallels there. And So First Reformed, the ending of that movie is just totally apocalyptic, right?
Yeah, very bleak.
And this one is the exact opposite of that.
Yeah, very hopeful. Gotta love it. the Paul Schrader effect.
And then it's so then if you kind of break that down, there's a man of faith who comes to martyrdom. And then in this, there is a neo-Nazi who finds love.
Yeah. Crazy, right?
I love difficult movies. There is value in a movie just really, really taking you for a trip like that.
Yeah.
And I appreciate it.
I agree. No, I'm and for that reason, I think that's why I see this maybe being in my top 10 at the end of the year. There's so much to parcel, and I'm sure we've talked for 50 minutes here, and I'm sure we could certainly dissect it even further. Let's go ahead and get to final thoughts, though. Any concluding thoughts you have here on Master Gardener?
Yeah, I'll do one more little man in a room through line. First film ends in apocalypse. Second film ends in the possibility of love with a wall between the two people.
Yep.
And the third one ends in the realization of that love.
Yeah.
Very, very good film.
Yeah, I don't want to accuse you of not listening, Jay, but I did mention that in my opening thoughts.
Well, I'm now bringing it all around.
Exactly. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, no, I do love that about the film. It goes from cynical and doleful to
that was 45 minutes ago, JD.
I know. It was a long time ago. There's a lot of conversation in between. But yeah, the card counter, there's it's reaching for hope. There's a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel. And then this film, it goes full blossoming.
Well, I was going, the wall in the middle was like a literalization of what you were saying.
Yeah. No, I like it. I like it. But yeah,
making the subtext text.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, 100%. I would definitely agree with that. I guess as far as a final thought, I just want to echo the performances here once again, because Joel Edgerton is really good here. Is this the best of his career? I can certainly see the argument. I would have to wrestle with that a little bit, but yeah. But I do love how he invokes those redeeming qualities in a very subtle way. I mean, this isn't a loud performance at all. It's very quiet, reserved, which I tend to respond to those performances a little bit more. But I think he's doing a lot internally, which is very effective. And then I think he has a great chemistry with Quintessa Swindell, who I think is also great here. And she has this innocence to her at the beginning. She starts to see the reality of what's unfolding in front of her. At times, she becomes a little volatile. Which some of that is what she finds out about these characters. Other of it is self-inflicted, given her own struggles. But I think she navigates those waters very well. And then it ends in, on this very provocative, controversial way. Again, if others do not like it, I wholly empathize with that. But for me, given the thematic ideas at the core of this film, for it to end on that idea of forgiveness, given the extremes of the characters, I love that the film is willing to go there. So I do love it. One of my favorites, but I also can't recommend it. This is just one of those that if you see it, I hope you like it.
I couldn't recommend it to a quote unquote normal person.
Yeah.
But a film fan, a person who appreciates being challenged with the art that they take in, absolutely. Question for you.
Yeah.
What Marvel property should Paul Schrader take on?
That is a great question. In some ways, I would like to see him do the Marvels sequel, and then you bring in Marvel into the Marvels. It just makes sense to me.
I think he should do the Silver Surfer movie.
Silver Surfer, yeah.
I don't know. That's how we should end every review, is ask what...
because that's the trajectory, right?
What Marvel movie should this director direct?
Yeah, Paul Schrader, I don't know.
Maybe he's more
give him
suited for the
X-Men.
DC universe.
You know, that is probably true. And I'm not as familiar with DC, so I'm sure someone would have an answer for that. But he does seem better suited for that. I would agree.
A little
At any rate.
darker about gods and monsters.
Yeah, I'm sure there's something. There's got to be some sort of religiosity, symbolism or ideology behind it.
You know what's
and
weird? As
assuming
much
there
as
is one.
I love Paul Schrader, I haven't seen that many Paul Schrader movies.
Yeah.
I've seen the big one, and Blue Collar last night was the first time I had seen that movie. So I've seen Blue Collar. Mission was one of my 10 favorite movies ever made.
Mm-hmm.
First Reformed was my number 2 movie of the 2010s.
Mm-hmm.
Hard Counter was in my top 10 the year it came out. Now this one, I'm thinking will certainly be in the running for a top 10. And then I think the only other one I've seen is that Lindsay Lohan movie he made.
Yeah.
Which is terrible.
The Kenyans?
What was that one called? I Know Who Killed Me or something?
I Know Who Killed Me. Well, the one with Lindsay Lohan, that's The Canyons, right?
The Canyons, yes. What is I Know Who Killed Me? The Canyons is the one that I saw.
Yeah. Did you see
bad.
Dying of the Light?
No.
Yeah, I did see that one. And I'm trying, this came out like 2014, so I'm trying to recall. But
Oh, I Know Who Killed Me is a different Lindsay Lohan movie.
oh, gotcha. Not Paul Schrader.
Not
No,
Paul Schrader.
Dying of the Light is this film with Nick Cage, and it feels like a direct-to-video. Like that's what it feels like.
Well, I mean, he by all accounts, there are movies in his filmography where it's like, yeah, this is just objectively garbage.
Yeah, like Dog Eat Dog was another one with Nick Cage.
That's
in
the one with Nick
2016.
Cage that is like unwatchable, like gave people nothing but headaches.
Yeah, like bad. Yeah, that was real bad. And
I don't
maybe
know.
that's
Maybe I should just keep the experience pure and only watch the masterpieces.
maybe. Yeah, I mean, and that's all. Like, I give the card counter a little bit of grief because it comes off the heels of First Reformed, which I think is one
It
of
is
the
a
best
reaction
films.
to First Reformed. That movie
Yeah,
is so sick looking, effectively so, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I really like that movie.
yeah. I know you love it, and a lot of others do. I just find the film very disconnected. However, I will say, I bring that up to say, given everything like pre-First Reformed for quite a while there, man, I would take the card counter tenfold over a lot of other Paul Schrader films. So,
Have you still not seen Mishima?
no, that's I'll make
Watch it
that a priority
right,
this year.
Right now.
Yeah.
Stop what we're doing. Let's get off this review and go watch Mishima. I watched it again the other night. It's
Yeah, I saw.
it's good. Woo.
Yeah. No, I'll give that one a go. Yeah, I'll give it a
Please
go
do.
because I know you love it. At any rate, let us know if you agree or disagree with any of our thoughts. And what I've seen from Letterboxd, we are very much against the grain here. So I would love to know how everyone else thinks about this film. You can email us InSessionFilm@gmail.com. You can also hit us up on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Jay, any final thoughts before we get out of here for this episode?
Paul Schrader, give me one more movie. Just one more. And then you're good.
One more? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm okay. Yeah. Let's do a whole new trilogy. What do you
Star
think?
Wars trilogy?
Star Wars? Yeah. A Paul Schrader Star Wars before he goes?
You should take over Andor.
Well, I was going to say, if it's in the vein of that, it actually might be really good. It could be that. So, you never know. At any rate, be sure to subscribe to the podcast. You can subscribe here on YouTube. Be sure to hit that like button. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Stay tuned for episode 536, I believe we are on. We're doing our Disney Renaissance Power Rankings, I believe is what we're doing.
Yeah.
I was just talking with Brennan about this last night because we just did a review for how to blow up a pipeline. What I told him, maybe you'll agree or disagree, who knows. I don't know if we'll have a Pinocchio, Sleeping Beauty level of disparity.
I don't either. I was putting together my ranking and I was like, wow, this is boring.
It might be an easier conversation on the whole. Brendan seems to think that there's going to be some disagreement, and I'm curious what that's going to be. So
I don't even know what it could be over. I don't know.
I
don't know. We'll see. We'll see.
Yeah,
It'll
we'll
be
see.
fun.
I could see like maybe some debate over, my number 4 being his number 1 or something like that. I think that's as crazy as it's going to get, though.
Yeah. I don't think there will be any. My number 9 is your number 1.
Yeah, nothing like that anymore. Anyways, stay tuned.
I'm excited.
Yeah, stay tuned for all of that. Thanks, Jay, for being here. Really appreciate it, my friend. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you next time on the InSession Film Podcast. Master Garner, good.
Hey, it's Chris Mitchell. After 10 years with no dog, we got Walter. I bring him to work with me a couple days a week, but on the days when he's not here, he goes to Ridgeside Canine for puppy daycare. Walter absolutely loves it there, and I know he's in great hands. Clean, spacious, happy. We even see pictures on Facebook of what he's up to. I love that you can have him train your dog while your dog's with him. I can't recommend them enough. Ridgeside Canine Training Facility and Aquatic Center on Gateway Drive in Winchester. That's RidgesideCanineWinchester.com.